Hi there, this is Sheila McCrea, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my unit plan on George Washington and his presidency, or as I have it listed on my unit plan, Washington's presidency and an early republic. So, here's some reasons that I outlined on why I picked this subject. I think it has good foundational leadership about our country. I mean, after all, Washington was the first to ever become president, and it shows the importance of his his early years rather, in our new democracy. It also has some great real world connections, like him stepping down after 2 terms, the peaceful transition of power, and then his foreign policy was huge. American presidents after him followed that same foreign policy of staying out of other countries' business if it didn't involve us. It also has diverse perspectives, as far as some of the things that it touches on, such as enslaved people, Native Americans, political rivals, specifically that between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson that started in Washington's cabinet. And then lastly, just engaging in historical moments, some hallmarks that were big during his presidency, the Whiskey Rebellion, and of course his farewell address warning about political parties, which quickly developed after he became president. So, some things about my 3 units. I'm just going to kind of go over these summaries and objectives and maybe refer to some things in my unit plan that I'm holding on to here. Lesson 1 summary, it's simple. It's about George Washington and how he shaped the American presidency. Some of the key examples that he set as far as defining the role as president. He was the first. He established the whole idea that a president serve only 2 terms, remaining neutral in foreign conflicts, and he led with a lot of dignity. He also was the first president that formed a cabinet of advisors that helped define the president's role in lawmaking and showed that the executive branch could be powerful, but yet also respectful of the democracy, not the monarchy that everybody was afraid that it could be. So he was all around good leader and just set the tone for future presidents to follow. So some objectives of this lesson that I wanted is that I wanted students to be able to understand how Washington shaped the American presidency. I'd measure that by learners performing vocabulary, academic vocabulary, how they use it in a sentence. Resources under which the students will learn vocabulary will be through their active journal, which is a component that I use in class. Their class notes, which is an outline that I format that is based on my presentation of Google Slides in the lesson, and as well as pair and share activities and other assessments. The level of mastery and accuracy require the behavior to be considered with 80% accuracy without error within 5 minutes. So this is a great lesson for students because it shows how one-person choices can shape an entire system. George Washington, he didn't have any blueprints for this. He had to figure out how things were as he went. And so it shows the importance of setting a good example, how leadership isn't just about power, but about service. And many of the traditions that he started are things that we still follow today. Um, all of these things created by real people making thoughtful choices. And it helps them connect our past to the present, just because for 200 plus years, a lot of the things that George Washington did, presidents are still doing today. So before I'm a piggyback here, before I get to talking about lesson 2, I do want to highlight some things that I always do when I start each lesson is I kick off with discussing a guiding question. In this particular lesson, we talked about stay out or get involved, which kind of connects to Washington's foreign policy. I try to use a lot of pictures. One of those is I projected a picture of Washington, and I asked students to visualize a lot of things with what we read. And of course, I use video and text as well. My startup activity usually involves vocabulary, and students are going to practice taking notes, practicing vocabulary. Some of the vocabulary of this lesson included inauguration, tariff, cabinet, bond, speculator, and neutral. So those were some of the lesson goals. So let's move on to lesson two, or rather, lesson two, its summary and objectives. Um, so the summary of this, it ties in with Alexander Hamilton's role in Washington's cabinet, how he's going to create a stable economy as the first Secretary of Treasury. He does that by creating a national bank. He assumes state debts, meaning that the national government's not only going to pay their debts from the Revolutionary War, but also take on the debts of the states. He's going to establish taxes and tariffs, which of course create some discord in the cabinet. And then he is a proponent of manufacturing and trade. These last two things are what really start the rivalry between he and Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, who, has a strict interpretation of the Constitution, as well. Feels like the government should have limited involvement in businesses. He wants to keep things small, that agrarian concept, small farms, small businesses, where Hamilton is, wanting to get in on manufacturing and trade. And after all, America is behind Europe on that because the manufacturing system is already going on in England at this time. Some objectives of the lesson: students will understand how Hamilton created a stable economy. Some measurable actions will be determined when learners perform and illustrate their ideas through the PMI strategy. And then students will have the use of the interactive chart and their PMI strategy to master the lesson objectives. I use a lot of interactive charts. This is a component of the book that I use. It's great because it's a technology piece that students can use. They can use it on their Chromebook, or I also have a Sonic View board, so it's great. Again, level of mastery accuracy required for at 80% without errors in 5 minutes in. And students will do this by sharing with me or other students. So that is lesson two. And just some highlights of lesson two. It's great because it shows how smart planning and bold ideas can solve big problems. Something that's just as true as today as it was back then. Learning about Hamilton, obviously, this is something that's important about financial responsibility, how economic decisions affect everyone, and that taking risks and thinking creatively can lead to real change. It also shows that teamwork matters. Sometimes Hamilton is a great example of being a good team member, and other times he isn't. It also helps students see that economics isn't just numbers. It's also a good way for me to implement math into a social studies lesson. So let's take a look now at Unit 3. And I'm going to turn in my notes that I'm looking at here. If you can just bear with me here. Unit 3. Okay. Students are going to be making connections with America's reaction to the French Revolution, and then we're also going to highlight Washington's foreign policy here. So, George Washington's foreign policy focuses on neutrality. He believed that the United States should avoid getting involved with other countries' wars when the French Revolution turned violent and led to war between France. This is going to cause a lot of problems. Again, this will be an area that Hamilton and Jefferson will disagree on. Hamilton has a lot of loyalty towards England. Jefferson, a lot of loyalty towards France. And it really poses a hard question for Washington, too. The French really stepped up to help us in the Revolutionary War. In particular, Lafayette and Rochambeau were close French allies of Washington and helped in that final battle close in on the English. it really is something that's going to tug at a lot of heartstrings on whether we should get involved or not. But Washington chooses to stay neutral, issuing the Neutrality Proclamation of 1793 to keep U.S. out of the conflict. This is huge because his foreign policy of staying out of conflicts with other countries that doesn't involve us, it sticks around with us for a long while. Um, some objectives: students will make connections with American reactions to the French Revolution and Washington's foreign affair policy. Um, we'll look at, I didn't mean to hit that, sorry. Um, Students will look at an interactive map of foreign affairs under Washington. Students will make inferences to complete the chart based on the supporting ideas that they've identified in their charting. And again, the level of mastery, 80% accuracy without error within 5 minutes. And I've honestly found that they need a little bit more than 5 minutes on that interactive chart that I have. Oh, so this lesson's valuable because it helps them understand the importance of wise leadership in difficult times, how foreign events can divide a country at home, why neutrality can be sometimes the smartest move, and that foreign policy isn't just about other countries, it's about protecting your own people and future. And even though some people wanted to get involved in the French Revolution, at Washington, in some ways, some historians will say that he wanted to get involved too. He had that loyalty to, as I mentioned, to Lafayette and Rochambeau from their help in the Revolutionary War, but he had to look at the bigger picture here. It wasn't good for the country to get involved financially or mentally. We just got out of the Revolutionary War. Washington himself was ready to be done with politics altogether after that and wanted to retire happily at his Mount Washington home, but he didn't. He um, came into service as president when duty knocked at his door. A lot of people just didn't want to be involved in a bloody war again. And the other thing is we're just digging out of financial ruins and our debt incurred from the Revolutionary War. So it's just fiscally not smart to get involved. So now we're going to talk about some of the UDL aspects of my presentation. In On my webpage, I have links to some things that I go into greater detail, probably in some cases too much detail, but I want to be over the top on this. So engagement, the why of learning. I'm going to try to give kids choices, connect the lessons to real life, interest and goals, and then make sure that students are respected and heard, and then some good collaboration between peers and the teacher and co-teachers in the classroom. So in my lesson on the presidency of George Washington, I use UDL engagement components to ensure that students remain interested, motivated, and actively involved in learning. So some ways to do that, and I've got tons listed here. I'm probably going to breeze through some of these. If you want to look at these in depth, again, I've got this PowerPoint shared on my website that I've created. So offer choices for learning activities, connect the content, students' interest in real-world relevance, and provide varied levels of changing, of challenge and scaffolding. So let me just talk about one of these here. So the first one, why? Well, giving students choices allows them to connect with the topic of their interest, making it more engaging. It also allows students to focus in on something that they like doing, or that they're good at utilizing. Students can choose to learn about George Washington through different formats: watching a video, reading an article, listening to a podcast, or doing a hands-on activity like creating a timeline. These options are good too because it allows for differentiation, and I think a lot of times my co-teachers and the paras up in the resource room like these different options because students can tailor them to what they're good at. So these are some of the choices. Some other things that I've utilized: use collaboration and peer learning, provide opportunities for active participation, promote self-reflection and goal setting. Um, I really like number 5 because it helps students stay involved, and I know if they're retaining information. A lot of times I'll project a question before we read a segment, and I'll say, hey, as we're reading this segment, um, think about this question because we're going to come back and try to answer this. And a lot of times I'll incorporate a pair and share activity and that question is usually also in their notes as well. Or then after we read the segment, they can pair and share, write a couple sentences, and then I kind of give them a time. All right, you've got 2 minutes to discuss this with a classmate. Uh, and I give them 2 minutes. And then when we get to a minute, I'll give them a warning. And then I'll say, hey, you've got about 30 seconds. Decide between the two of you who's going to share. And then I might even say, hey, Jackie, be prepared. I'm going to call on you and I'm going to call on Max. That kind of prompts students that, oh, I better get my stuff together because she does want to hear from me. So I really like that one. Also, encourage emotional engagement. All of this benefits for students, fosters curiosity, and builds a deeper connection, and self-directed learning, critical thinking. I'm a big proponent of the more my students are talking, the more they're learning. I often say to people, if my students can explain segments of my lesson like they talk about TikTok and social media, then they get it. All right. As far as representation in UDL, um, you know, this obviously removes barriers to understanding. It supports students with learning differences. I have a lot of ADHD students. It makes learning more inclusive and engaging. That's what I love about it most. So, the what of learning. So in my lesson on the presidency of George Washington, UDL representation components would ensure that all students have multiple ways to access and understand the content. Um, all of my handouts, all of my notes, I pin all of that in the Google Classroom. At the beginning of the week, I email their class notes that they take notes on, my teacher's notes. I email that out to all of the students so they have those things. And my co-teachers and the paras in the resource room, they also get copied on that. So then they can help me check and make sure that students have all of those things. Here's a big one, and I'm going to list several. Provide multiple means of representation. My biggest way I do this, because not all students learn the same way, so offering different formats helps cater to diverse learning styles. Like I said, I put it in a Google Slides with visuals, and in my unit plan that I do have posted on the website, you can click and look at some of my examples of that. It helps learners grasp key ideas. It also prompts them on, oh, this is something that I need to know. And I tell them, hey, if it's bolded on my presentation, you probably should write it in your notes. And also, it's a good way to put info, graphics, and things of that nature. Sometimes I incorporate those into the news, the class notes as well. Offering multiple formats for presenting key concepts, graphics, charts. I do this through my interactives. It's a great way for students to do something independently on their Chromebook, or again, a great use of the Sonic View. And I can have students lead that as well. Here are some other things: highlighting critical information, providing language supports for diverse learners. I have a lot of Spanish-speaking students who English is their second language. My favorite one, a lot of my special ed students use this, is the text-to-speech tool, where they can listen to readings, and also sometimes they can even verbalize when I ask a question for an assignment, which is great. And then providing multiple representations of assessments, written, oral, visual. I also give some alternative assignments. I've got a lot of students who are reduce 50%, or I have to chunk assignments. Using multimedia to enhance understanding. I love using multimedia. When students can see things with video clips, it's great. Probably one of my favorite video clips is the History Channel, America, the Story of Us, because it follows right along with 8th grade American history curriculum. So that's an awesome one to use. UDL representation matters in this lesson, obviously because all students can access the content. Content is presented in multiple ways. Students with different learning needs are included, with those with disabilities, language barriers, and different learning styles can also engage with the material in a meaningful way. So this is just, I think, all of this is a must of any teacher or any lesson. All right, so let's talk about action and expression, the how of learning. All right, let students write, speak, draw, act out, or build. I utilize this all the time in projects at the end of lessons. Technology tools, speak to text, we've already talked about that one, video recordings. Physical supports like graphic organizers. I'm a big graphic organizer, especially when we talk about the differences or the conflicts of Jefferson and Hamilton, because that starts right in Washington's cabinet. And then strategies for planning, organizing, and reflecting, and then also, different formats, posters, essays. I like to let students choose. It's a good way to see their talents highlighted and how they can express what they're learning. So in my lesson on the presidency of George Washington, UDL action and expression components would allow students to demonstrate their learning in different ways based on their strengths and their preferences. So some of these ways: providing multiple ways for students to express what they know. Again, not all students are comfortable or effective in the same type of expression. So offering different methods of demonstrating learning gives them the opportunity to showcase their strengths. Offer options for physical action and engagement. Here's the thing. Some of my students, because of anxiety, hate pair and share. So, I can do something different here. Movement is always good because it gets students up and moving. For us to think that students can just sit there for 50 minutes like quiet soldiers, that's just crazy. They're not going to learn anything. They're going to get sleepy and they're going to want to take a nap. Allow different levels of challenge, tiered assignments, flexible project options. I've got some students who they can only do the bare minimum. I have some kids who finish early on stuff, and so I want to keep challenging them. Encourage self-regulation and reflection, goal setting, reflection, checklist or rubrics. I use rubrics a lot, and I like to use an example assignments or projects for students to see. I know me as a learner, that helps me. Provide opportunities for peer feedback and collaboration. Use technology to enhance expression. And then why these things matter? Well, students have flexibility. Different learners are supported. Students develop confidence and skills and active participation. Students engage with the content and each other, and it's more meaningful for them. When they are participating, they know what's going on. So this, I think, approach is good because it showcases their knowledge and allows them to use their strengths to do so. All right, let's talk about UDL reflection. So, encouraging students to think, self-assessment, goal setting, adjusting learning strategies. Sometimes I do this class period to class period. When I start a lesson, I think, this didn't work first period. And sometimes adjusting learning strategies depends on the dynamic and the demographics of your students in each class period. That changes for me. I'm encouraging ownership of learning and promoting continuation. All right, so an example of UDL reflection. I kind of started sizing this stuff down because I realized I had a lot of information. So here's an example. All right, objective. Students will understand George Washington's role in the founding of the United States, focusing on his leadership decisions, policy, and personal values. So, step one, introduce the content. Start by providing multiple forms of content about George Washington, ensuring that all students can engage in the lesson. So, a video about George Washington's leadership. Reading materials. ReadWorks is great for this. Biographies on different presidents at their reading levels. I like ReadWorks because um, you can look at the Lexile. And then, of course, infographics or timelines. And a lot of this stuff I incorporate into their active journals. So some other steps that can be used in this. Step 2 for me would be active learning. Step 3, reflection time. Step 4, set goals for the future learning. And then finally, step 5, self-assessment. Now, why these things work? Well, a variety of expressions. Students have different ways, again, to reflect, encourages metacognition, personalized learning, supports growth mindset. In this example, UDL reflection serves as a tool for students to make connections between their learning. They can set goals. They can become better learners. This process can be repeated and repeated. It allows students to track their progress over time. All right, so let's talk about culturally responsive stuff. All right, so this is an approach to teaching that recognizes the importance of including students' cultural backgrounds in the learning process. It makes learning more relevant and engages by honoring and valuing diverse cultures, experience, etc., etc. So, doing this into my lesson on President George Washington, it involved ensuring students' diverse cultural backgrounds and experience are acknowledged. It helps all students see themselves reflected in the learning process, meaning how does it benefit or affect them. So it leads to deeper engagement and understanding. Okay. Sorry, all right. Now, here's an example. This would be step 1 of my plan, okay? And I've got several steps to this, which you can look at on my PDR, my handout that you can click on the website. So, include diverse perspectives. When discussing George Washington, include the experiences of indigenous people, enslaved Americans during this period, as they were significantly impacted by all of these policies. You know, when George Washington becomes president, we have the first 10 amendments right away, but we're not going to have rights for African Americans until the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And that's a long ways away after the Civil War. And then even so, it doesn't include women, just African American men. So you can discuss Washington's policy towards indigenous nations, how it treated the Iroquois Confederacy and the creation of the Northwest Territory. For enslaved Africans, you can examine Washington's personal relationship to slavery, his decision to free his enslaved workers after his death, and broader context of slavery during his presidency. This really becomes an issue because we talk about in the Constitution that all men are created equal. And even though the Civil War is a long time away, people are starting to think, we say this, but it's not really including enslaved people. And then recognize and validate cultural backgrounds. And this is a good place to start a classroom discussion on things, on how this affects the people living in early America, specifically their own family culture and family heritage. Other steps that could be used, provide opportunities for all voices, integrate multiple perspectives into assignments, reflect on the impact of Washington's presidency on diverse groups. Doing this in a lesson on George Washington's presidency, it helps make history more inclusive and relevant to all students, especially in a school like where I work, because we don't have physically a lot of this diversity. And students can be more aware of other cultures, such as African Americans and indigenous people, and how they might feel today on some of these issues. So it's even a good thing to talk about in a school like mine where there isn't a lot of diversity in students, but they still need to be aware of these things for the real world. And then let's talk about this last thing in responsive reflection, okay? The process by which educators are actively assessing and adjusting their teaching practices to be more inclusive and student-centered. I feel like I do this all the time. I'm constantly tweaking things to include these things. So here's a scenario that I've created. So students from diverse backgrounds feel disconnected from the content. Here's some things that you can do. Reflection on student engagement. After the lesson, reflect on how engaged the students were with the material. The teacher realizes that some students might not feel a connection to Washington's policies because their culture backgrounds were not represented in the discussion. As well, adaptation of content, cultural responsive adjustments, and evaluation on future changes. After this change, you know, how is engagement increased and participation from the students? These are all great things to be considerate of. This concludes kind of my highlight of my lesson and some of the strategies that I've implemented. I'm just going to end my presentation here with a quote from George Washington: "Associate men of good quality if you esteem your own reputation, for it is better to be alone than in bad company." So be careful of the friends that you keep. Before I sign off here, a couple things that I want to point out that you can look at on the website. I've got this great thing that I put together where I mapped out the UDL components. It's several pages. It's a great thing to look at. It certainly can be applied to other lessons. And then another thing that I have is this right here on these strategies, and how I would use them in my goals. Again, those are things that are on my website. Thank you so much. I hope this has been informational, or informative rather. And I want to stop. Right here.